Now, I'm not just doing this to ruffle some feathers, but this might ruffle some feathers. And people that are really into deer and deer habitat, I think great passion. They love wildlife. They love whitetails. And they love spending money on things that don't work or spending time on things that don't work because it sounds good. Victim to the latest fads. They got to install everything. The more money you spend, the better, right? Wrong. The more money you spend, typically the worse off you are for deer hunting and your local habitat, because you get sucked into fads that really don't make a difference. And I'm not calling most of these right here fads. But what I am saying is I want to talk about why they sometimes distract you from the big picture of whitetails and wildlife and actually holding you back. Because I've been to a lot of properties where they've spent thousands of dollars on various plantings and don't have anything to show for it 5 years later. And certainly their wildlife and whitetail habitat is not any better off, let alone the populations or their deer hunt in general. So we see that all the time. And when we're looking at properties where people spend a lot of money, the properties are worth a lot to begin with, and people are extremely passionate about their whitetail habitat, or we wouldn't be going out there in the first place, times 300 properties a year across the country. So we get to see a lot as a group. To talk about number one here, I love apple trees. I love soft mass. You know, if you're down in southern Ohio, for example, chestnuts can be incredible. But you don't get a lot of volume when you go up north, if any at all, when you look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Not to say there aren't successful plantings. Our friend Jack Turner from Family Tradition Tree Stands in southern Michigan has chestnuts growing well on his property. They're protected from westerly winds, north winds, and everything's perfect for them to grow in those locations. He's taking care of them. The bottom line is, even in the best case scenarios, I've seen them down in West Virginia where there's 60, 70 planted in chestnut groves on a client property. And he tells me that they're full of chestnuts. It's a September thing. They're all gone by early October and it's vacant. So he spent years planting these and getting them to grow and taking care of them. And then they don't even really help his deer season. Yeah, it's cool they're there, but there's a lot of stuff that's cool that doesn't actually do anything. And we're trying to keep your fall victim. Soft mass, all great stuff. But if you don't have hardwood regeneration on your property, varying ages of timber, diversity of timber where you actually have shrubs and briars, poor quality timber, if you don't have fields, edge, food plots on private land, then those apple trees mean nothing. You can have a great property without apple trees, but you can't have a great property with only apple trees, if you look at it that way. Or only persimmon trees, or only chestnuts. They're just a part of the picture. So instead of focusing on those first, add those as a complement to an already great whitetail property. A property that allows you to get on and off the property without spooking deer. A property that has great hardwood regeneration, shrub tips, maybe some acorns, some briars thrown in, has that complete picture of daytime browse, so deer that are bedded on your property can actually stay or want to stay on your property during the daylight, and then that complementary food source all put in a systematic, strategic way so that deer, you know they're bedding here when you go on the property, they're feeding here, and then maybe they leave the land after that. That's that big structure, that big movement that we talk about all the time. These are complements to a great deer habitat, but they can't be the deer habitat themselves. There's a much bigger picture. Acorns, this is a big one. You know, I've been on properties where I can think of one in central Wisconsin, off Route 21, goes across the center of the state. And so I'm on a property, and they have a large section of red oak in the back, and they had aspen mixed within there. So what's the recommendation? Well, I'd like to see some of those mature mass-producing red oaks saved, the biggest ones, the best ones. I'd like to see some of them removed that are leaners and are just taking away from the mass production of the others. And I'd like to see all that aspen clear cut so you actually get regeneration and good long-lasting browse that's available from September, October, all the way through March, April when the deer need it most, then favoring just the acorns and just the oak production for boards for foot. No, what the forester and MFL plan writer did there is they had hack and squirt the aspen out there, kill them all in favor of the red oak. So then I'm out there a few years later and it's all just wide open timber. Where do all the deer stay? They stay on the neighbors. And the acorns are only available for a limited time of year. So horrible for wildlife habitat under the guise of a wildlife plan that didn't hit its mark or even come close. Really, really bad. And so you want to look for that balance. Acorns and oaks, great as a complement to an otherwise great parcel. As a complement to all otherwise great browse on your land, hardwood regen, woody shrub tips, briars, maybe some various weeds, forbs and forages within your woods. But the acorns themselves are bad. If you had a whole woods of oaks, that's really bad because you need so much more. Again, there's so much more to the big picture. So I'm not saying these are bad or they're fads. It's just the focus on them is so great sometimes that we ignore the big picture. And in case of that client that I'm talking to, and we've seen that before, where oaks are favored for timber production under the guise of a wildlife plan at the expense of great wildlife populations. I hope that makes sense. Number 3, red osier dogwood, one of my favorite shrubs. I've even had articles written about that, videos where I talk about red osier dogwood as being one of my favorites, and it sure is. We have red osier dogwood planted out here in some of our diversity pockets. Big rock trees, Tom and Seth, love them. They have their cuttings, they plant them every year. You better get them, you better look them up and find them if you want them this year because they sell out fast. They keep improving increasing their production, but they sell fast. Bottom line, red osier dogwood is incredible. I don't know if you've ever gone into a swamp and had red osier dogwood on that swamp. Take it during the dead of winter when it's super cold. You can snap it open. You'll see green around right under the skin. It's almost like apples skin on the outside. It's reddish color, then green, and then it's white. It's tender still. Even in the dead of winter, it tastes like almost like apple tea, if you imagine that. Taste it. See what I'm talking about. You think I'm weird for doing that, but I've been out with clients. I'll have them taste that. It's like a tea.
I just had a guy do that last week.
Yeah, it's not bad, is it? You can chew on it. It's actually, it's not like the opposite of that would be an oak twig. Box elder is similar to that, except it has a different smell and taste to it, obviously. But red osier dogwood, great for deer, great as a complement to good habitat, one of my favorite shrubs. But they are temperamental to planting. They need to get their feet wet a little in lower soils, but they can't take flooding in the early season when first established. They can take flooding, a lot of flooding, later on, second, third, fourth year of growth when they're already established, but they can't when you first put them in. So too much water is a bad thing when you're first planting them. Not enough is a bad thing. So we had to water our cuttings, not just those. We had hybrid poplar, dappled willow, hybrid willow. We had other things out there that we planted these with, but we had to water them 5 gallons a piece about 10 times. And that was times around 190 trees and shrubs that were planted in diversity pockets for screening with rednecks. It was a lot of work, 2 days of work. Believe it or not, with all of that throughout the winter, throughout the summer, 10 different times. It was a lot of work. Luckily, we have a full-time employee, Wes, who was able to help us out with that greatly because that was way too much for just Jen and I to handle. But they're very susceptible. You have to be very careful. I love planting red osier dogwood. Again, we have it out here, but it's a complement to an otherwise great habitat, and it's very susceptible to overbrowsing and then drought and temperamental to water sites. So be very careful with it. It's great, but I've seen big giant plantings of it where all of those were wasted because they didn't have a chance because it was too dry, they weren't caged, it was too wet. Whatever the problem was in that site, you can't put all your eggs in that basket. And again, the structure of how you move on the land, how you access the land, your stand locations, how it relates to food and bedding movements and everything in between, that's that big picture. And again, this is a complement to that, not the big picture itself. Native grasses, CRP blends. If it's laying down during the wintertime, it really isn't offering anything. So a native grass blend that stands up in Kansas, northern Kentucky, probably isn't going to do the trick in northern Ohio, let alone Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota even. So you have to be very careful. Native grass, just because it's a blend and it has big blue stem, Indian grass, little blue stem, switchgrass in it, doesn't mean that it's good and doesn't mean it's diverse. It's still grass, folks. We want grass that'll stand. That's why what we do is we try to put a switchgrass blend that is primarily and largely a majority of it is what should be planted in your area for the tallest, strongest switchgrass. And then we have some medium heights to help keep it from blowing over and to offer some stiffness to it. But bottom line is, with that switchgrass, we want that grass to stand as long as possible into the wintertime. But you can't dilute it. You can't dilute it with food or browse. It's got to be separate. The CRP blends, horrible. I'm not sure there is a good CRP blend out there. Yeah, you get a tax break with it, but I've seen 20 acres of CRP, 30 acres, 40 acres where it's a 40-acre field and there's no wildlife because, it lays down sometime in November, December, and it doesn't come back up. And it's a complete waste of space, acres and acres, dozens of acres or more at a time. And that is a really big problem. Some of the pheasant mixes. If it's got forbs, forages, grasses in it, and you're planting it for pheasant and you have no cover, pheasants aren't going to use it. Doesn't matter what name is on the bag and how much you spent, and some of those mixes are very expensive. You want to have solid cover here, switchgrass, shrubs, sumac, hardwood regeneration, and then it's okay to have some diversity thrown in the middle of it. We have a pollinator blend. It's great, but that pollinator blend alone is not going to do anything. It's got to be a part of an otherwise big picture. In fact, I recommend the pollinator blend at a ratio of 1 to 4, 1 to 3, meaning pollinators to switch. Switch is 3 times more, 4 times more in the mix. You want it as a complement to offer food, but ultimately the deer or critters, pheasant, rabbits are going to be there because they have cover, and then they have that accompanying good habitat. Again, pollinator mix that we offer. It's a complement to an otherwise good program, but when you have some of these blends, some of the native grass blends, CRP, they can be so detrimental because they're taking away acres and acres at a time. You fall victim, you sign up for it. And I've seen it go in reverse. I've seen someone plant 30 acres of switchgrass, and only on the edge is there any kind of wildlife for deer use. Pheasants, rabbits, deer, they don't go into that 30 acres. So they're probably an acre on the outside and 29 acres wasted, and it's a 30-year program. They wish they could burn it all up. The best thing in a case like that is you'd go in and you'd put about 50% in 1 to 2 acre pockets here and there scattered throughout the inside of that switchgrass stand to total about 50%, 60% of the area. Now you'll have great habitat because it's diverse. You don't want switch growing in there. In fact, you don't want conifers growing in there because that's more like switch. You'd want hardwood regeneration, shrubs, briars, weeds, goldenrod, ragweed, combination of all that early successional growth growing in there. Now you have something good. But you see that separation. You have the hardwood regen, the pockets, diversity pockets, and then you have solid switch. When you mix them all together, that's when you dilute them both and you have nothing good. And those native grass blends, for the most part, CRP blends, even most of the pheasant mixes, are really bad. Ponds. Got to have a pond in your property to attract all the wildlife, right? Wrong. Unless your goal is fishing by the cabin, you're stocking it with fish, maybe a swimming pond, that's pretty cool too. Don't fool yourself into thinking that putting a pond on your property is a good thing. I've even seen ponds in the middle of a deer parcel with the thought that, well, yeah, we're going to attract more deer on the land. Well, if you did, you can't hunt there because you're spooking all the deer every time you go in and out. And they realize this, but they're asking, what do I do with a pond now? And now we've had some ponds out here that are man-made with a berm on the backside, and we kicked out the berm and got rid of them because, for one, we don't want EHD spread. So when you have receding ponds, mud, and then it recedes during the late summer, and you have a dry cracking mud, that's where the EHD midge propagates, and you can actually spread EHD and get your deer infected by having those ponds and cracked mud. That's why I like water tanks. There's no dry and cracking mud around the water tank. It's just water. And then we plant grasses. We plant our Green Max Traffic blend that we have through WHS Pure Wildlife Blends. But all that being said, great for fishing, great for swimming. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you're going to attract a bunch of deer. And even if you did, you're pulling the deer away from your stand locations, and it limits your ability to actually offer a water hole to actually hunt over. So I'd rather have a property with no water and offer my own water where I need it to direct traffic for deer and place water holes out there for wildlife than to have a big man-made pond that really doesn't attract a lot of wildlife and is good for more fishing or swimming. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just don't fool yourself. Rubbing posts, this is more of a fad. In fact, the hunting public, they show this really cool setup where buck comes in, cameras behind it, it hits it on the way out to a food source. Really great location already. And I can think of some areas like out here that we could put a rubbing post in a situation like that. A deer's going to hit it maybe when they come through. A buck might rub it during that time of the year. That's really not attracting anything more to that area. The area is already a good spot. I'll tell you what it will attract is we've had a rubbing post, cedar post out in a food plot, and then we have a mock scrape. We watch it for 60 days. We did this 2 years ago. You look up mock scrape versus mock rub. And the rub was hit 21 times. Quite a few different bucks. I don't remember the total number. It might have been 7. But bottom line is, it looked pretty cool. Shavings everywhere on the ground over a 60-day period. Like I said, it was hit 21 times, all bucks, of course. And then the rub, right next to it, 6 feet away, was hit 210 times. Giant difference. Mock scrape is more for communication. They leave their preorbital gland scent. And what's cool about that was a third fawns, third does, and about 1/3 bucks hit the mock scrape. Of course, all bucks hit the mock rub. The bottom line is there's nothing like the power of a mock scrape. We have over 60 videos talking about that. I see a lot of mock rubs on properties. I've seen a lot where people just feel like, man, I spent the time to build this and there's no deer coming into it. Well, I can guarantee you, if you put that out in the middle of a food plot, it'll get hit like crazy. But what did that accomplish? Really, what does it accomplish by putting it out there? We put them out there because we want a spot for bucks to come into with a camera and get their picture on the edge of a big food source. We have some inventory scrapes like that. But we make scrapes, not rubs, because we know that bucks will come a long ways out of their way across that food plot to hit a scrape. They really don't care about that rub unless it's in their way. And looking at naturally, rubs out in the woods, they get hit a very small percentage after they've been made one time. So that first time, most rubs are never hit again. That shows the power of a rub versus a mock scraper. The mock scraper hit 365. And so we just went out this morning, January 2nd, and there's fresh urine in a scrape. And you wouldn't otherwise know that anything had even been there other than the tracks and a little pocket of urine in the snow. But those mock rubs, kind of cool. Hunting public, really cool footage if you watch those hunting videos. Pretty awesome, but there's a lot more to it. And again, big picture, guys. Thinking about the entire big picture and the structure of deer movement, those deer have to be there in the first place with a lot of other things going on right in order for some of these to even add as a complement to what's already there. And then finally, large conifer plantings. So I still see this. It used to be back in the MFL days where they're putting in for CRP. They're actually going in for CRP, giant pine plantations. And the cool thing is about it now, some of those are like up on the tops around here. And you can use them as areas to blow your scent into and to walk through and to access stand locations because it's a big blob of nothing that doesn't hold any deer. And you can count on deer not getting downwind of you in them. So that's kind of cool for that. But this is 30 to 40 years later. You don't want to do that and just let's take out 30 acres across your top of your property and we'll just make it so we can block movement for us to get in and out of stands 30 years from now, 20 years from now. Not a really good thing, but these road conifer plantings are very bad. Even if you look at a lot of studies shows that if you have staggered plantings, they did this with aspen. Staggered plantings instead of road plantings, meaning you can't see down the rows, increased grouse populations 30 times over road plantings because it decreased warfare, predation, disease, and stress among wildlife species. So if you don't want wildlife in a location, plant conifer rows. If you want wildlife, plant them staggered, and they should never be over a couple hundred trees per acre at the most, not the 700 or 800 individually, 7 by 7, 8 by 8 spaced to produce future boards per foot. They should be pockets, and again, they should be a complement to an otherwise already good habitat with hardwood regen, shrubs, bushes, shrub tips, briars, weeds, grasses, varying ages of timber, some oaks thrown in, maybe a couple apple trees, red osier dogwood pocket here and there. You see the picture? It's all that stuff first, then you start adding the goodies beyond that. And I said number one deer distraction up here and deer habitat, deer hunting, however you want to look at it, And I asked Dylan what his number one is, and I'm gonna do a number one and an honorable mention. Is that okay, Dylan?
Yep.
So I'm gonna write just the numbers down so Dylan can't see this, and I'm gonna go. I should have written this down first, Dylan, because I had. Okay, you got yours, Dylan?
Yep.
Okay, mine's done. Pen's down.
Okay.
Okay, what's your number one?
I'm at ponds for number one, and I'm at CRP for number two. Oh,
okay.
We did it. Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, I put number 4, the native grass CRP blends for number 1. And then I put, and ponds were right up there in my top 3.
Okay.
And then I did acorns only with the giant focus of future boards per foot and hardwood stands taking out big blocks. But ponds are right up there
ponds
with me too.
Like, all the clients that I visit are like, I've got to have a pond here. I want to have a pond here. It'll be a great water hole, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like, oh, let's just put that up by the cabin, put some fish in there, and then we'll do a more strategic water hole out here.
And a beach. And a swimming dock.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're on the same page, but yeah, that's I hope you guys can appreciate this. There's a lot of distractions out there. We talk about a lot of design. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, we talked a lot about critical tips for designing your land, how to design your land overall, design fails on a whitetail parcel. So really start to look at those and that overall structure of your land, and that'll really keep you on the straight and narrow. I can tell you out here, this 4 deer seasons we've had this property. Purchased it in the spring of 2020. Like talked about, the first thing we did is put a mock scrape up on the property while we were turkey hunting. But then also we addressed access with switchgrass screening. We started with that first. Our food plot locations, that determined where our access would go. Our access determined where food plots could go. We also put all our stand locations in with mock scrapes and cameras so that we start the structure of the entire movement of access, food, and bedding on the property. It wasn't until year 2 that we actually started working in the woods and actually cutting bedding areas to enhance those areas because we're attracting more deer to the land with the food, so we wanted to align them a little bit better. And then that's when we actually added water holes too in that second year. I love water holes, but just time-wise, we added them second. And then we've worked on more pollinator blends and increased bedding activity throughout the years too, and a lot more switchgrass planting. So continue to add water holes and locations. So we wanted to add that structure first of how we can move around the land and be a predator and complement what was already there with quality food, and then the cuttings came. And I hope that makes sense. We're trying to teach that big picture so you can be on the path to success without getting drawn into some of these distractions that can lead to more money and time spent with a very small amount of reward. That's the 80-20 rule we talk about. A lot of people spending 80% of the amount of time and work that you can spend on the property for only 20% of the potential results. Do it the other way. There's a lot that you can spend 20% of your time and money on to capture 80% of your potential success. This stuff right here is the opposite. I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, or WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.